And first of all, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
So, tell us what is addiction and what is the difference between physical and physiological addiction? And can you also elaborate on the terms dependence syndrome and withdrawal symptoms and uh, elaborate on stuff like that?
Okay, so to begin with, addiction, we define it as a repeated excess use of a drug or a substance, the cessation or the decrease of which will cause symptoms of distress to the patient. And patient always has this consistent urge, what we term as craving, to have the substance. And eventually, this addiction causes physical and mental deterioration in a patient. Then coming to the terms physical dependence. So in physical dependence, there is a repeated and a consistent use of a drug that leads to an altered state of physiology in the person, such that if they try to decrease or stop the drug, they would experience a set of symptoms which is specific to each drug, and that is what we term as withdrawal. And psychological dependence is more of a mental desire to take the drug and a mental sort of restlessness that develops if the person is not able to procure the drug. There are no physiological symptoms as such in people with psychological dependence, but they usually have this mental distress.
Okay.
Coming to, you mentioned about withdrawal. So withdrawal syndrome is a specific set of symptoms which is very specific to each drug. They occur in people who are repeatedly using a certain drug in a certain quantity. And whenever they try to stop the drug or they reduce the intake of the drug, they suffer from this distress. It could be physical symptoms, physiological symptoms that occur, and that is what we term as withdrawal syndrome. I would also like to make a mention of the term tolerance, which we hear very often. So tolerance is basically when somebody is being used to taking a certain amount of drug. Initially, it causes, say, X effect. But after 10 years of taking that same drug, to cause that X effect, it needs a more higher quantity of the drug than the initial quantity. Example, if somebody was consuming, say, 90 ml of alcohol to get a certain high, after 5 years or so, they will have to take 180 ml to get the same high which they used to get with 90. So now 90 is like water to them. So they need to take higher quantity. That's tolerance.
Okay. So can you also tell us like what is the most commonly abused substance? Like what are the most commonly abused ones?
So the most commonly ones that we see in our OPD is like alcohol. Then there is nicotine and all the nicotine products. So we have tobacco, nicotine cigarettes, commonly stuff like gutka and things like that. Then we have cannabis, more commonly known as marijuana, ganja in India. Then we have drugs of opioid, that is heroin, morphine. Then the medical ones, tramadol, which is also a group of opioid group of drugs. Then we have inhalants, which are like glues and other these petroleum products. Then we have hallucinogens, that is LSD and mushrooms and things like that. Then we have stimulants, amphetamines are very commonly used. One more common group is sedatives, commonly known as sleeping pills, which people abuse a lot. So the other less common ones are caffeine and other substances and medications people might abuse, but that's rare. These are the most commonly ones which are seen, common ones which are seen in the OPD.
Okay, so we've come across a new term. It's called behavioral addiction. Can you just elaborate on what that is?
Sure. So behavioral addictions are a group of behaviors which have the similar phenomenology and neurobiology as that of substances. Which, what I mean by that is, they cause the similar changes in the brain as a drug like alcohol or cannabis would cause. And they have the similar symptoms of withdrawal when trying to stop that behavior. They have we have internet addiction, gaming addictions, sexual addictions, compulsive shopping behavior. So these are the few terms which are relatively new, and they have been included in our DSM-5 for diagnosis of psychiatric disorders.
Okay. So can you tell us if there are any signs and symptoms to identify people suffering from addiction? Is it evident to others that someone is suffering from addiction or?
Yes, it is definitely evident to people. The person would have a excess desire to take the drug. There would be this excess persistent desire which would be present. Second is, hello?
Yes. Sorry, there was a connection problem. Yes, you're audible.
Okay. So second is, even if they try to cut down, despite persistent efforts to cut down, they are unable to control the use. Third point is when these people have to stop the drug for whatever reason, they are not able to procure it, or it's not available. They show this set of symptoms which I just mentioned about withdrawal symptoms, which are specific to each. Drug to cause the same effect. Am I audible? Okay. So, okay, I'll continue. So tolerance, as I was saying, is initially what they were taking, they need double or triple the amount to get the same high. Then the next point that we see is these people, because of all these behaviors, they start ignoring, or they are ignoring their family, their work, their social responsibilities. Then what we also see is these people continue to use a drug despite harm. In the sense, they will start developing symptoms of, alcoholics develop jaundice and things like that, liver diseases. So despite the fact that some health professional has said, please stop this drug because your health is getting affected, still they will be continuing knowing that there is a harm. Another thing that is evident is these people spend a lot of their time procuring the drug, or consuming it, or getting out of it, in the sense that supposing an alcoholic person wakes up in the morning and takes his drink, and his entire morning he is sleeping, then he will wake up in the afternoon and take the next drink, and then he would be sleeping, and the whole pattern, this cycle, vicious cycle, continues. So his entire focus has gone from his work, family life, personal life and other things to only the drug. Now the drug is the only focus of his life. Also, these people will take these drugs even in dangerous situations, like while driving an automobile, or going to places where consuming drugs and then doing work is forbidden, like people in railways, on the cranes and construction sites. You can't be intoxicated while on those machines, right? But these people, despite knowing that, will land up intoxicated on their duty just to avoid the negative effects of the withdrawal. And these are most of the criteria which are enlisted, which are there in the DSM-5 manual. We use this criteria to decide whether a person is suffering from a substance use disorder or not. And as you say, obviously the family members, the co-workers, friends, everyone will notice a difference in this person's behavior, because he would be focusing more on the drug and less on other aspects of his life. So it's generally the family members and all who will generally get these people to the OPD for help. Yeah.
So how do these people get into substance abuse? Is it because of peer pressure, or is it genetically related? Let's say there is a person in the family who is addicted to a certain drug. So do the children pick up from them, or how is it? How does it work?
Okay, so there are two parts to the substance use. Initially, people take it as a recreational purpose. And then what begins as recreational and occasional use, or use at social gatherings, eventually goes on to become a dependence pattern. So there are multiple factors which affect these two stages that I mentioned at various aspects of their life. So initial part, the first, recreation use, it depends on the drug availability, the environment that the person is living in. It depends definitely on the peer pressure, because it is usually the peers and the friends that introduce the person to a drug, say a joint of cannabis or a drink or a first smoke. So these factors play a role there. Now, as the person progresses in their life and grows up from their adolescent stage to adulthood, another set of factors play a role. Things like their own personality traits. How good are they at coping with stress and negative events in their life? If there are certain groups of people who are unable to deal with stress, they suffer from a lot of frustration and on small minor issues in their life, and then these people tend to escape their problems by resorting to substance use. That is one factor. Then the genetics plays a role here, because we have seen and studies have shown that invariably most of the patients who have substance use disorders will have a family history of a father or a maternal or paternal uncle or grandfather who would have consuming some substance. Need not necessarily be the same, but some substance use. So these people, genetics shows that there are certain changes at their DNA level which is passed on in their DNA to the younger generation. That is, the patient inherits it from the family, and these are what, if we know the DNA that is present, we have certain proteins around it, which the histone proteins, what we call. So based on the stressors from the environment, these histone proteins undergo demethylation or methylation, and they expose certain areas of the DNA. So accordingly, that expression of that trait comes in, like dopamine levels are high or low, and endogenous opioid levels are high or low, or the response to those chemicals. Accordingly, these factors change. We call this as epigenetics. And how now it is proven that the environmental stressors and this genetics together puts the person in such a place that they have already a vulnerability to the substance use behavior, plus their environment stress, family stress, financial stress, relationship breakup stress will put them in a vulnerable situation, and then the DNA and everything will manifest and they will succumb to the substance use. Also, I would like to mention about learning behavior. So these people, as they're growing up in their family, they see their parent, some father or grandparent or somebody consuming substance or using substance as a way to escape from their problems. So that also sits in their mind that I have seen such so and so kind of a pattern in my life. So that thing also clicks in, what we call as a learning behavior. They learn these negative coping skills. So that's how, to put it, these factors broadly play a role in deciding somebody would succumb to the substance use disorder or not.
So how do we deal with denial? Like whenever we ask someone who is into, let's say, cigarette smoking or alcoholism, they would generally deny it and they would say that they have control over themselves and they know what they're doing. So what do we do about it?
So most of the people who come to our OPD, outpatient department, are in denial. Like they are brought by their family members, and the family members would be telling us one story, and the patient would be completely denying everything, pushing the blame on them, on some other XYZ thing.
Okay.
So to deal with these people, how we go about is we have this format of taking the history. So we ask the patient about how much substance they are taking, what quantity, what frequency. Then we start asking them objective questions. Things like, before you were 10 years, so say for 10 years he's been consuming this substance. 10 years back, how was your work? And now how is it? Definitely there will be a change. So he will start saying that, yes ma'am, I am absent from work and I have been received, I am getting memos, or my seniors have been scolding me, my performance has reduced, I get into quarrels, there's more of absenteeism, which is noted. That is one objective fact. Then second, we ask him, how about your relationship with your family members? So he will definitely mention 10 years back when he was married, how things were, then how things changed, his relationship with his children, how it is, and parents, how it has got strained. Then we ask them, what about society? How do you see things, yourself in society? And he says, yes, 10 years back, people in the society respected me. today 10 years later, people don't really acknowledge me, and even at social gatherings, extended relatives are talking about my use, so I usually shy away or do not go to these gatherings. Then the most important which we show them is obviously their health, which will deteriorate. One thing that really brings them to an awareness is their financial aspect. We show them ki, okay, you are using so and so substance, so definitely you have to buy it. So say for a day you are spending 300 rupees on this drug. So in a month you will spend what, 30 into 3, that is 9,000 rupees. Now say this is a person who is earning 12,000 rupees a month income. So obviously 9,000 is getting wasted in purchasing substance and only 3,000 goes to your family. Then we ask them, now multiply that 9,000 by 12, that is 12 months, almost more than a lakh. So 1 lakh per year, now multiply it by 10 years, 10 lakhs and more. So 10 lakhs of rupees has gone wasted in using this drug. Then they would come up and usually many people say, yes, we are into debts. We have sold our property because we had to get rid of these debts. We have borrowed money. So there is an objective stress, that is objective problem that is visible, financial issue, work issues. Once we, through our counseling and therapies and talking to the patient, show them different aspects of their life and how it has been impacted because of the use of their substance, that is when we are able to break through that denial phase and enter a phase where the patient is able to negotiate with us and we are able to negotiate with him as to and show him that he has a problem, he's suffering from a disease, a disorder, and requires medication. So this is usually how we go about.
Okay.
Yeah,
So how
go
do we
ahead.
help someone we know? Let's say there's someone we know got into this problem. So how can we help them?
So the best help to give anyone who's suffering from a substance use disorder is to take them to a mental health professional or somebody who is an expert in de-addiction, because only an objective evaluation by an expert will be able to tell whether this person is suffering from a milder form or it is a more severe form, and how much is the extent of damage to his body, to his life, and how much he can, all these factors and things can be done through the help of the medical profession, like the mental health expert, and also whether this person requires medicines or to what extent he requires medication. The thing to do is to just get them to an expert.
Okay. So there is nothing called self-recovery tips or something that we can suggest. Just going to the mental health professional would be the key. Is it so?
Where suffering, substance disorder, and life such that important aspects are a good phase. The only best help that person can get is to go to an expert and get assessed, so he will know how much
Okay.
damage and what can be done about it.
Okay.
Sometimes we
So what
suggest
other
to people.
consequences do they face?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention
Please
that
finish.
sometimes people who have sometimes some people have cigarette smoking and things like that habits, and then they realize, I'm smoking and this is going to harm me, and they do make a healthy attempt to cut down. Yes, some people succeed, but most of the time people require help, and that is and things to help these people out who require.
Okay, so what other consequences do they face? Let's say apart from family and social life, like
Oh.
some people even get into suicidal thoughts.
So yes, there are definitely consequences, as we saw the extent of the damage that drugs do. So basically these are chemicals that are getting into someone's body, right? And they are bound to alter the physiology, the normal homeostatic mechanisms of the body will get disturbed. So beginning with their body, physically, they suffer from a lot of disorders, like alcoholic patients consuming alcohol suffer from liver diseases, kidney diseases. They suffer from muscular problems, heart problems, nerve problems, alcohol use, psychiatric syndromes like depression, bipolar disorders, anxiety disorders, psychosis. Many drugs like cannabis is known to be a precursor to trigger schizophrenia in vulnerable patients. It's one of our psychiatric syndromes. So, medically, there are physical disorders, there are mental disorders. Then, coming to other aspects of their life, occupationally, they are suffering. Family life is getting affected. The marital life gets into conflict. Socially, they are affected because now they have to be away from social gatherings, be away from their relatives because of all the stigma. Financially, they go in debts. Even many people into legal problems because of the use of these drugs, because many of these drugs, as you know, are illegal. So anybody using these drugs will definitely have police problems. They even get into accidents when they are driving under intoxication. Many people get into other diseases, other substance uses, gambling, and they get into other problems like this kind, lying, stealing. So all of these behaviors become evident in them. So essentially, entire domain of their life gets affected eventually because of this drug. And yes, you mentioned about suicide. So many of the people might be suffering from underlying clinical depression, which they do not know, but they use the alcohol or they use some drug to overcome that low mood and the symptoms of no interest and the suicidal thought. So they use the drugs to overcome that. But what happens is sometimes they give in to these suicidal ideas and they attempt and commit suicide. So this is what these people go through. Yeah.
Also, some people take self-medication like for anxiety or depression. They randomly take alcohol or they smoke cigarette and they think it helps them or something. So what about that?
So first to briefly mention, depression is, as I said, a clinical syndrome of it's a mood disorder where there's a persistent low mood. Anxiety disorders are again a group of disorders where the person is having all the symptoms of anxiety. That's physiological symptoms in the form of
Can you hear me? Yeah, now you are audible.
Okay, so I was talking about anxiety, depression. So these are clinical syndromes which have a group of symptoms, and drugs, alcohol, and things like that do reduce the anxiety in patients. And all these people generally have sleep disturbances. Anxious people, people who are anxious or people who are feeling depressed have sleep disturbances. So people try to self-medicate, consume alcohol just to help them sleep or help them, feel more lively, get away from that sad mood or feel less anxious. But in the long run, the disease has not gone. That is, the clinical depression or the anxiety disorder stays or gets worse. In addition to that, another
there is a stigma prevalent amongst the families. Even they wouldn't accept that the person is, going through addiction or something. They would also try to hide it because there is a stigma that would be associated with it. So they would generally maybe give them counseling or even emotionally blackmail them. But that's how useful is that, and what do you think about that?
so family members have this behavior. At least some of them. This is not a helpful behavior. It just worsens the addiction. And the only best way to go about is to get them to the expert. And for these kind of behaviors which are exhibited by the family members, we need to counsel them separately. That your patient is suffering from a disease. But he is not doing this purposely. He is not trying to torture you. He is not taking any revenge. Nothing of this sort. That he is suffering from an illness where the substance has interfered with his brain, and now he needs the substance to go on. And the only way is to treat it like any other disease, like hypertension, diabetes. That's the only way to cope.
Okay. So there is something else called amphetamine abuse. So it's prevalent amongst students. So they say it is a cognitive function enhancer. So people abuse that also. So what do you have to say on that?
So as I mentioned in the beginning, one of the drugs which are used is the stimulant group of drugs. So amphetamines falls in that stimulant groups. So abusing amphetamine to enhance cognitive function is not a good idea. Because it would invariably interfere with the brain and make the person addicted to that. And if that person then tries to stop it, he would be having a set of withdrawal symptoms. So in the long run, it's not really good. Instead, we can resort to other healthier ways of enhancing cognition. And to add amphetamines in lower doses and in a modified form are used to treat certain disorders like ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder. But there it is again prescribed by the mental health expert after assessing the person, and it is given in a very controlled format. So that is one medical use. But other than that, mostly it shouldn't be used as self-medication.
Anything else that you would like to add on to this? Anything that you'd like to emphasize on?
Just one thing that addiction is a disease, like any other disease, like hypertension, diabetes, and other medical disorders that we know. And we need to remove the stigma from people who are suffering from it. Because these are people who are suffering from a disease. And they require treatment. They require counseling, therapy. And most importantly, they need our empathy and help rather than our criticism.
Okay, then, so if anyone has any questions, you can put it in the comment box. We'll address that. We'll wait for a minute to see.
Sure.
It was very informative though. Not many of us are aware of certain things that you had said. So I guess we can wrap up this session. What do you guys think? Should we end it or should we wait for a minute? Okay, then it was very informative and thank you so much for joining us. And
thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay, then have a good day. Bye.
You too.
Bye.